Alright, speaker 1, you will get the microphone from Graham and return the microphone to Graham. And so Graham will always have the microphone from the speaker, from speaker number 1. Something else also, the clicker will be also with speaker 1 because he will be, or are you always the same person clicking the PowerPoint? Yes? And so why don't I just put with the 3 microphones, okay? So the 3 microphones are on the piano. The other speakers, you always return the microphone to the piano, okay? All right, when the bell rings, we will start. When people are clapping, then the second group will come and sit. Do not wait for anything. Do not wait for people call you. No, I can stay here.
谢谢。
因为等一下开始的时候，可能要关门哦。
好。不要碰吗 ？Apple 花6天，然后 OK， 对。
Graham, can you ask one to try the clicker? It is on the piano. No, ask one of them to go so they know where it is. Or people would probably spit on the microphone, and then we might get sick. It is bad. We're waiting for the team to arrive, and so we still wear the mask. We are still wearing the mask. Okay? Sorry for that. Thank you for that reminder.
好，我想我们先掌声谢谢婉玉老师跟新哲老师，好不好？还有世宏老师，还有 Brian，其实要安排这样的活动，很多波折。我们从 去年10月签约，那今天这算是一个起头。那因为现在疫情的关系，很多国外学校其实那个上课状况是不稳定的，对，所以我们今天先做一次非同步录影，之后还是会有希望同步线上的方式。那我想应该老师都有跟你们讲，接下来我们还有澳洲，澳洲的学伴已经分完了吗？知道吗？还不知道？笔友，对，那个笔友，那再来其实应该也会朝向有线上交流的方式。那老师只有一个期待，就是说，你们把该有的先辈知识，你们要报告，因为英文我一直强调它只是一个工具，你讲出来要有内容。所以各位在平常你的不同学科领域里面，你要先充实一些基本知识。那当你要来 present 一个你要说的主题的时候，你说出来的东西是有内涵的、有层次的，不是只是一个表象的描述。OK， 那我相信各位其实你花时间，绝对都会有那个成果。那我也预祝今天录影顺利，然后也能够看到对方学校也有一些回馈。那希望同学能够透过这样的活动，让你的英文学习有更多元的呈现。好，谢谢各位，谢谢。
Good morning. Yes, happy Friday, that is correct. Welcome to our Senior 1A event. Welcome to our presentations. Our topic for today is Indigenous rights, Indigenous issues, and so we will begin with group number 1. So please welcome group number 1.
Hello everyone, this is Group 1. Glad to see you guys. Our topic is the challenges of indigenous people. Indigenous people are the groups of people that have lived on this island for a very long time. We know since foreigners arrived in Taiwan, they were treated badly. However, do you know what kind of problems they are still facing today? In this presentation, we are going to talk about 3 of the challenges Indigenous people are still facing right now. First, we will start off with the problems of hunting rights. Can Indigenous people go hunting in order to follow their culture? Then we will move on to cultural loss, that Indigenous people are losing their languages and origins over time. Finally, we will end up with self-identification, meaning new generations are confused about their identities. Next, Rena will talk about the problems of hunting rights.
Thank you, Joe. The topic of my presentation is hunting rights. In Taiwan, there are some indigenous people who are sentenced for hunting. Some people think hunting is a bad thing because wild animals are decreasing over the years, and indigenous people should not kill animals. But hunting is their traditional activity and their way of living. They live with nature and animals for a long time, so they feel unhappy about being sentenced. Please look at this picture. What this picture wants to show you is indigenous people take to the streets to protest over hunting rights. I think this should not happen, so we should take this issue seriously to ensure their rights. When I watch videos about indigenous people and try to understand their culture, I found that they hunted with a respect for nature in mind. I think people should know this. They respect nature and we should respect them. Next, Emma will talk about more problems.
Thank you, Rena. My presentation is in 2 parts. I'm going to take a look at the loss of the indigenous culture. What I want to show you, for example, example is how and why the anti-tattoo culture was lost. To begin with, it is because during the Japanese occupation, the Japanese ruler forbade tattooing merely indigenous. They cannot use the tools for tattooing, and tattoo students can't attend school. Secondly, it is because of the introduction of Christianity around 1950. Christians believe in only one God, which has destroyed the original beliefs in the Intel system, as well as caused most Intel people to give up the tattoo culture. The earliest people who lived on this earth, on this island, were indigenous. Certainly earlier than Han people, so we should consider their rights and protect their culture. Otherwise, their culture will be lost very soon. Next, we will talk about the self-identification.
Thank you, Emma. Let me start by asking you a question. Have you ever thought about who you are? Maybe not right, but what about indigenous people? So the problem I intend to discuss will be a self-identification of indigenous people. As a result of living in Han society and learning Han culture, they are unable to learn their own cultures, which means they are unsure of their own identities. What would you think today if someone told you they were indigenous people? Would you think they were brought to school or lived in a cave? Discrimination and despise are problems that make indigenous people not proud of their identity. But as minorities in high society, they have no power to change their situation. However, I think we still can have three parts of the solution. The first one is formulating the laws. Laws will give them the strongest power to change their situation. The second one is start a procession for name rights. Through the procession, more people can aware their problems and begin to see their importance. The third one is respect. It is the thing that we can do. Their identity may be different from ours, but that doesn't mean their strength. Finally, Joe will give us a conclusion.
Thank you, Ben. So today we have talked about three challenges that are hunting rights, cultural laws, and self-identification. These issues must be taken seriously in order to preserve our original culture in Taiwan. And the last thing we want to say is, only if we embrace and respect different cultures will the world become better. Thank you for listening. Thank you, group number one. Now let's please welcome group number two.
Hello everyone! Have you ever heard of anyone saying that indigenous people can hold their liquor well or they can sing well? If you do you know that it is a stereotype against the indigenous people? And this is not the only problem they face. In today's presentation, we will introduce 4 different problems that the indigenous people are facing. First is a common one: discrimination and stereotype. Like the question I just asked, this kind of things happens in our daily life. Maybe you'll think, well, there's nothing to do with me. Sure, but what if this kind of things happen to you? I would like to introduce a new word: microaggression. It means that when a society is facing minorities, they often see a slight offense to others due to explicit and implicit prejudice. And it often happens subconsciously or unintentionally. So basically, the discrimination and stereotype against indigenous people are called microaggression. But what is their microaggression? First of all, it's a social expectation toward the indigenous people. Second, indigenous people have different life experiences. Through the experiences, there may be some misunderstanding between. Last is the different historical memory. Due to the differences in history, there are some costumes that they used to have or still have it now. For instance, people often think that indigenous people can't hold their liquor well only because they drink a lot or they are alcoholic. Well, it's true and not. For indigenous people, they can only drink on special occasions, and they are not allowed to overdrink. The reason why they can hold their liquor well is only because the activity of some of the genes are better, and it helps reduce discomfort. Last, how to solve this problem? To prevent microaggression, education is important, not only to educate students, but to the society. Understand the culture and history of indigenous people, to know more about them, and most importantly, to respect them. Next, let's welcome Rex.
Thanks for Emily. Next, I'm going to take a look at the employment issues of the indigenous people. Do you ever think why did the indigenous people always need to overcome the employment problems? Before I start, I want to ask you a question. If you are a boss, would you hire the indigenous people with high salaries? I think most of you will say no. Most of the boss just want to give the indigenous people freedom. What is freedom? Low salaries, low employment stability, low rate and interest protection. According to a report, the indigenous people have 4 reasons to explain what they are facing. The first one is location. Standing in Eastern Taiwan was definitely their biggest disadvantage. The second one is education. The indigenous people are lacking of educational resources. Can you imagine that you need to go to school on foot for 2 hours or more? Some indigenous people even need to live in school during elementary. This reason caused their education level became lower and lower. Third, hiring foreign employees changed the indigenous people's life. Their work change lasts a lot. The last one is social discrimination. The social discrimination was the biggest issue for them to overcome. Up to now, there are still a lot of stereotypes on them. In other words, when they are born, their fates have already been decided. But how to change their fates is an important issue for the government to solve. Establishing some policies for the indigenous people, having more educational resources, and creating work opportunities to them. Those are some good ways for the government to solve this problem. Now, I hand this presentation over to the next speaker. Let's welcome Christy.
Thanks for Rex. Now, I'm going to introduce conflicts between laws and traditions. Humans and animals are both part of the earth. This year, the Taiwanese government has been dedicated to protecting wildlife animals and returning rights to indigenous people. However, what if the indigenous people shoot the wildlife animals? Hunting is your right. Earlier in 2021, the Taiwanese Constitutional Court had heard from several plaintiffs on the Taiwanese wildlife conservation laws. They believe the rights of indigenous people has been restricted, who count hunting as an important cultural practice and are allowed to carry out small-scale hunts. When the hunter of Punong, Ho Wang Guanglu, shot former Sun Manjak, he was found guilty. There are also many hunters from different tribes being arrested just because they were enforcing their rights. They hope the Supreme Court can interpret the law again. Hunting can not only express some social significance, but also the spirit of the hunter. According to the law from UNESCO, we can create an environment that can express a variety of culture with communication. Biodiversity, cultural diversity, both need to be conserved. Even though the law can maintain social orders, but if there is a conflict, the government and people still need to discuss it together. Do not follow like a sheep. Next, let's welcome Jedro.
Well, for Kristen. Now, how much do you know about face tattooing? In what follows, I'll speak about the endangered Aboriginal culture and language. I will mainly focus on the tradition, face tattooing itself today. Do any of you know that there is only one single person left with a face tattooing on in Taiwan? Lin Zhimei of the Hasidic tribe is the one last surviving elder with a face tattooing on. The loss of face tattooing can be traced back to when the Japanese government had banned these kind of bad habits on their perspective. Well, thus, due to modern consent, face tattooing is no more a symbol of beauty. More people choose to remove their face tattooing by taking surgeries. Though the tradition are now diminishing as the others do. As long as we still value these tribes' culture, the culture will not fade. Moving on to the language loss part. I will start with a brief introduction. 42 of the Taiwanese indigenous languages, 9 are considered endangered, and one of them is only used by 10 people. Almost all indigenous people but the oldest speak Mandarin, Taiwan's official language. What can we know from these? Well, if there's too few people using one language, chances of them to communicate with each other are also low. Second, it is not really necessary to use their own traditional language when Chinese or Taiwanese are more commonly used by the general public and are more convenient to communicate with. In recent years, the government has gradually paid more attention to this issue and has come up with several improvements. First, such as national language competition. This photo was taken in 2016 when our classmate Victoria Nguyen had participated in this competition and had eventually won an award. This is the end of our presentation. We're glad to see that the indigenous people's issues are now starting to come to the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you, group number 2. Next up is group number 3. Let's welcome group number 3, please.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Group 3. This is Vicky. Have you ever thought that one day our language might disappear? Today's topic is the question of Aboriginal language and culture. Like what people might say, the Aboriginal people are treated badly by Han people. But then take a look at the Aboriginal tribes themselves. There are also some tribes being forced to leave their original land because of the lower population. The first part is an introduction. We will take Kanakanafu to be the presenting tribe of all the tribes because they are the recent tribe that successfully proved themselves unique culture and independent from the other tribes. Michelle will introduce what the Kanakanafu people are facing, such as language loss and decreasing population. Secondly, the body. In Nancy's presentation, you will learn how the Aboriginal people are affected. The last part is conclusion. Amy will explain what the government did for the Aboriginal people and the future may hold. Let's welcome Michelle.
Thank you, Vicky. I'll discuss 2 types of issue Aboriginal people face. Have you ever wondered how cultures of Aboriginal people are lost? Let's look at the history of the Kanakanavu. Kanakanavu was part of the Zhou tribe. When you compare the 2 tribes' traditional culture together, it might seem like they're similar, but if you put the 2 tribes' language together, you can see there are some differences. In Zhou, people are called Sao, and in Kanakanavu, people are called Cow. When the government was trying to give all the Aboriginal tribes a correct name, Kanakanavu wanted to leave the Zhou tribe. Kanakanavu became one of the 16 tribes after struggling for a while. Apart from this, Kanakanavu has been part of the Zhou for such a long time that it is difficult for them not to be assimilated by other tribes. Kanakanavu's language and culture then are at risk of disappearing or being absorbed by other culture. The next issue is the decreasing population. At first, Kanakanavu lived on the plain. Having fewer people than other tribes, they were forced to leave the place where they relied. When they finally landed, they became a smaller group. As a result, they must intermarry to maintain the tribe size. Because of this factor, their population decreased steadily. As you can see, this icon had appeared in some past slides. It represents the idea of cultures being assimilated by other cultures, no matter if it is Han people culture, invading the Aboriginal people culture, or it is smaller tribes being forced to leave by bigger tribes. It's a crisis Aboriginal people are facing. And next, Nancy will tell you how these issues affect the Aboriginal people.
Thank you, Michelle. What impact will the loss of language have on the Aboriginal tribes? The festival cannot be held, population decline, or cultural loss. This is Nancy. I'm going to take a look at the Aboriginal language loss. Presently, the Aboriginal festival in the city do not sing songs, but instead use speakers to play music. The content of the festival has become a sports competition, and some of the original appearance of Harvest Festival has been lost. Many young people of the new generation have even lived abroad since they were young, so they don't even know their ethnic language names. They're fluent in Chinese and Taiwanese, but they can't understand their mother tongue at all. This is unheard of and ridiculous. Intermarriage between Aborigines and Hans people had also decreased the number of Aborigines, in turn to affect the language they speak and affect the demographic change in Aboriginal tribes. Intermarriage and language loss not only reduce the number of Aborigines, but also make cultural heritage increasingly weak. Fortunately, these things have already risen in recent years, and the Aborigines have begun to restore their lost culture and language, and these things have gradually begun to value by people too. Next, Amy will talk about the solution of Aboriginals' language loss.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to tell you some of our solutions to Aboriginal language loss and what the government did for them. Since 2005, the government has begun to focus on the rights of Aboriginal people and started to compensate them. One of the transitional justice is preferential treatment for Aboriginal students' admission to school. That means if Aboriginal students have passed the exam of their own language, then they can get extra points for the GSAT. This policy gives Aboriginal people more opportunities and improvements equality in education. In our group, we also think of some solutions to Aboriginal language loss. First, we think that the government can promote people to travel and visit traditional Aboriginal tribes to experience Aboriginals' local life. Secondly, the government can establish Aboriginal language classes in the school, so the people who are interested in Aboriginal language can learn more about it. We hope that not only Aboriginal people can find their lost language, but also we can learn more about their culture. Let us protect this beautiful island together. Thank you.
group number 3. Now let's please welcome group number 4.
Good morning, everyone. Before we start, does anyone know what it means? Anyone? No. Exactly. As fewer and fewer people speak it, people are losing knowledge of this language. This is a language of Zhou people, and it means thank you. But now it's not just you that can understand it. Even their own people don't understand their own language. Maybe you'll say, what? How come this is possible? How come they don't know their own language? But since they have encountered many obstacles after being ruled by Japan and KMT, 国民政府, this is really happening. So, let's talk about the language issue that the Zhou people is facing today. First, we will introduce you the Zhou people and the language preservation. And why is it so important that we should face it? Or was it really that important? Spoiler alert, yes it is. And finally, what can we do to stop it from being lost? Then Julie will introduce the Zhou people to you.
Thank you, Anne. There are currently 16 ethnic groups that are officially recognized by the government, and the Zhou people are one of them. Taiwan Zhou people are distributed around Mountain Alley area and our school. Don't need to be surprised. I bet some of you guys have seen them and even talked to them. But have you ever heard them speak Zhou language? No, I don't think so. Then let's talk about why. The loss of Taiwan indigenous people's mother tongue are mainly due to the past government policy. Mother tongue represents ethnic identity, and Taiwan's long-term rule of foreign regions had confused their identity. During Japanese occupation period, the national language policy, like Rokugonoye, had this makes a family that all members of the family speak Japanese at home. But it was not only verbal price at that time, but also gave some substantial benefits. If now the government say, hey, if you only speak English during school, then you don't have to pay for your tuition payments anymore. What would you choose? Raise your hand if you would choose to speak English for free tuition payments. Exactly. But this is not the end. Since 1945, the KMT government had implemented several policies to promote Mandarin in Taiwan. For example, speaking language other than Mandarin during school in 1966 was punishable. You need to be punished because you speak your language. It sounds really ridiculous, but it is what happened in our history. But here's the question. Why is it a problem that I cannot speak my language? Let's go and find out why it's so important about language loss with Tina.
Thank you, Julie. As Julie said, language loss is a long-term problem, and now we'll focus on explaining why language loss is such an important issue for Zhou culture. Firstly, I think everyone knows that mainstream culture in society, such as Chinese culture and American culture, almost fade Zhou culture. For instance, fewer and fewer Zhou people know how to speak the Zhou language because they seldom have a chance to speak in daily life, and speaking Chinese or English is more convenient at work or school. Secondly, and also the most important reason is that Zhou doesn't have their own words. So they use ballads, which are the traditional songs or stories to pass the culture on. So it's almost impossible to preserve the culture if language is lost. Third, language is a key to connecting older and younger generations to let elders be able to spread and inherit Zhou culture, such as how to hold traditional ceremonies, how to sing traditional ballads, and hunting skills, etc. Finally, Language is also a key to self-identity. A person without a mother tongue is just like a tree without roots. Don't know where they're exactly from and have nothing to prove that they're from Zhou because they know nothing about it. According to the above, you can see language is playing a main role in inheriting Zhou culture. And that's why language loss is such an important issue that cannot be ignored. Next, Daisy will introduce you how to prevent this from happening.
Thank you, Tina. Let's look at how to fix the loss of indigenous language. First, government organizations produce teachers' books and teaching materials in indigenous language. Second, there are professional teachers to teach indigenous language in families and schools. Third, indigenous people have their own radio and TV station. First, establish a language research and development center to hope their language can be passed on to the next generation. Then I would like to introduce an organization. 语法科伊娜娜 Youth Culture Club 阿里山州族青年团。They preserve the Zhou culture. The member consists of young Zhou students who has lived in a tribe. They will return to the tribe in their free time. They also learn songs and traditional skills with tribal elders.
The preciousness of language cannot be cherished until it is lost. This culture needs you and me to pass it on. I thank you for listening and I wish you a wonderful day. Abia.
Thank you, group number 4. Next up is group number 5, discussing indigenous issues.
Good morning, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about indigenous issues. Before we start, we want to ask you a few questions. Do you know the most serious disadvantage of indigenous people in society? Have you ever thought that how you can help them avoid trouble? There are 3 parts to our presentation. Vivian and I will begin with the education part. Then, Andrew will talk about economy issues. Finally, Emily will discuss health problems. First of all, let's take a look at education issues. We divide it into 5 parts. The first one is a geographical factor. Because most of them live in remote mountains, the traffic is so inconvenient that they get the less contact with the main culture. As a result, the learning will be slower for them. Secondly, we want to talk about stereotypes. Most people have negative stereotypes about indigenous people, including low standard of living, no knowledge, and no level. So, why does this happen? It is because of family or social environment, like TV shows that influence them to think negative stereotypes about indigenous people. Next is Vivian. She will tell you more about education issues.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to introduce some education-related issues about indigenous people. Third, learning.
First of all, let's think about if one day the knowledge we learn must be abandoned. How will we think? The indigenous people must put aside their own culture and learn the mainstream culture. Compared with the Han people who has been exposed to mainstream culture since childhood. Indigenous people start later, and some of the indigenous children are now willing to learn a different culture. Have you ever seen turn around? It's related to our next issue. The first issue is about teachers. Teachers with license are usually unwilling to stay in a tribal school. When there is an opportunity to leave, nearly 56% of the teachers choose to leave, which leaves a high turnover rate and affects the teaching effect. And because the teachers are not enough, mostly teachers have multiple roles, like the Chinese teacher might be the PE teacher, the English teacher might be the math teacher. Finally, the family issue. For the indigenous people who are mostly working class, even some parents leave the tribe to work. Parents have no time to care about their children's education, and children's learning is affected because of lack of parental companion. Next, Andrew will introduce some economy issue for us.
Thank you, Vivian. Since Vivian just spoke about economic issue, so let me introduce the economic issue in more detail. Before I start my presentation, I want everyone to think about how many dollars does the indigenous people and non-indigenous people average salary gap in Taiwan? This is non-indigenous people and indigenous people's average salary comparison in these 4 years in Taiwan. Obviously, the indigenous people's average salary is lower. It is about $30,000, and non-indigenous people's average salary is about $40,000. It is about 25% difference. So this is one part that indigenous people face the economic issue. But why? Have you ever thought about what indigenous people face the economic issue? There are three main points to explain this phenomenon. The first one is the education level. Because of less education resources, some of the indigenous people couldn't get a good education. So some of them couldn't choose the high salary job to do. The second is environment damage. The indigenous people who work in agriculture face the problem that their land being developed because some businessmen choose to develop in the mountain for some benefit. The next one is health issue. Because of some environmental effects, the indigenous people get diseases. So some of them have to spend a lot of money on curing diseases. Next is Emily. She will discuss the health issue in more detail.
Thanks, Andrew. I want to talk about the health issues of indigenous people. First, look at these charts. What do you find? In addition to the average age, our data for indigenous people are higher. But everyone is human. Why is there such a big difference? These three are the biggest reasons we think indigenous people have health problems. The first one is the tribal age group. Vivian mentioned this issue just now. Many prime age people have left their hometowns to find work. So the only people who stay in the tribe are the elderly and children with limited mobility. Second, the most of the indigenous people live in mountains. Vivian's mother is a nurse. She often goes up to the mountain to see a doctor for indigenous people. The journey takes several hours at a time. So think about it. If there is an all-day busy doctor, how can he spare hours to see a doctor for indigenous people? You may think that it is good to build a hospital on a mountain. But ask yourself, would anyone want to go to the mountain to manage the hospital? Third, I want to talk about the health problem caused by the indigenous culture. On the screen, the first one is indigenous eating habits. On the screen, the blue one is the indigenous data. Obviously,
indigenous data are more higher than national data. But why it costs them? Because they believe that the middle line is a token between gods, and alcohol, cigarettes are used to worship the gods. That is why they have these habits. But second, indigenous people like to eat raw seafood. We all know that raw food contains a lot of bacteria. Even after processing, it is easy to leave harmful ingredients in human body. These eating habits and culture cause them more likely to contract diseases. After reading these reasons, you should know more about the indigenous problems. Hope these things will help you. Thanks for your listening.
Thank you. When we pause until the bell rings, let's wait for the bell to ring and then we will start again. So please do not leave your seats, okay? Can I have the next one ready? The next group will go when right after the bell rings.
Yes,
okay?
just continue.
I want to remind people, you need to zip up your jacket. Please remind your partner if their clothing, their uniform is clean and neat. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to group number 5. Next up, we will welcome group number 6, talking about indigenous people in Taiwan.
Hello everyone. At first, let me tell you a short story. Have you ever heard there is a foreign colonial power claiming that the land you live in is their territory? Their weapon is more advanced than yours, and they cause you to flee from your land, flee to other countries. This is not a story between Russia and Ukraine. This is a story of Sakizaya. Today, we're going to introduce Sakizaya and the problems they face. Let's begin with an introduction. First, I'll introduce Sakizaya itself. Second, Kevin will introduce the reasons of poverty in some of the indigenous society.
Third, Eric will introduce the problems of indigenous people's health. And last, Larry will introduce indigenous people's languages disappearing. Now, the topic I would like to introduce is Sakizaya's history. First, Sakizaya is a Taiwanese indigenous tribe which has about 1,000 persons, mainly living in Xilai Plain, Hualien. Second, before officially recognized by the government of Taiwan's 13th indigenous tribe, they were classified as a part of Amis, a tribe which has different language. There are two pictures in this slide. The picture in the left side is Amis' traditional festival, named Ilisi in Amis. The picture in the right side is Sakizaya's traditional festival, named Balama in Sakizaya language. Third, according to UNESCO's report, they listed Sakizaya language as critically endangered. That means the youngest speakers are the elders speaking it partially and infrequently. But now, they are trying to change the situation. In this picture, this is a YouTube video that teaches people to say Sakizaya language. Next, let's welcome Kevin.
Thanks to Stephen. During the Japanese occupation period, most of the indigenous people were going to During the Japanese occupation period, most of the indigenous people were faced with the development of long-term forest resources, and the tribal land was forced to be expropriated to Japanese government, which also led to their living space becoming smaller and smaller. In the period of national government, the living space of indigenous people was gradually compressed with economic development. And knowledge level is lower than that of general public, which makes it difficult to live and earn a living in the city. Next one is Eric. He will introduce about indigenous people health issues.
Thank you, Kevin. Today I'm going to talk about some facts of indigenous people's health problems. First, let's take a look at indigenous people's life. In this histogram, we can see indigenous women's average life is about 75 years, and men's average is about 65 years. While the average life of non-indigenous women and men is about 83 and 77 years. Second, they don't have enough medical resources. Before 2015, their medical resource wasn't enough and they couldn't afford what they needed. But since 2015, the government has been raising the medical budget. However, even with the higher budget, it is still difficult for them to have a well-cared medical resource due to where they are located. Let's take a look at indigenous people's death. Let's take a look at the death of indigenous people. As we know, our diets lead to different diseases. Indigenous people's culture, lifestyle, and eating habits is the same. The main cause of the death is heart disease. The second is malignancy, and the third is cerebral vascular disease. Next, Larry will talk about the language disappearing.
Thanks, Eric. Now I want to talk something about language. Have you ever been concerned about the disappearance of the native language for indigenous people? The same problems that Sakizaya and another indigenous people encountered is a language disappearing. There are three main reasons for this problem. The first is government's policy. In the early days of Taiwan, to quickly reunify people, forcing everyone to speak Chinese. That's why some indigenous people forget how to speak their own language. The second is the people use the language is dying, which means that the younger generation didn't even touch their own language. Let the older generation die before they have a chance to teach them. The third reason is urban indigenous people. A lot of indigenous people move to cities. Because of this, to learn Chinese is more useful to them. So that no one wants to understand how to speak their own language. Therefore, if we want to solve this problem, we should let everyone understand that no matter what kind of language or culture it is, it has its own value. We should not exclude another because of a different language or culture. We should respect and accommodate the existence of various cultures. Thank you.
Let's wait for the bell to ring again. 2 minutes.
All right, we'll wait 2 minutes.
Distract the videotaping. I'm hoping that the timing for you to go to the restroom would be the interchange of the group. You do not stand up during the presentation, okay? And then you stay there until the presentation is done and you come back. All right? Thank you very much. Thank you. We have 1 more minute. And can I have the group get ready? Thank you very much. The next group, please get ready.
Thank you, group number 6. Next up is group number 7 with the challenges Indigenous people are facing.
Hello everyone. Today our group is going to take you in on the challenges that the Indigenous people are facing. Our presentation is divided into 3 parts: health issues, ethnic identity issues, and the economic issues. First, let's take a look at the health issues. How would you feel if I tell you that the Indigenous people have a shorter life expectancy than the average person? About 30 years ago, Taiwan had its first urban Indigenous people. Because of the transformation of the social structure, they had to leave their hometown and go out for work. Because leaving tribes means more job opportunities, but it also comes with a huge price. And that is, the pressure on the personal psychological level increased sharply along with the unfamiliar environments. And at that time, most of the indigenous people were working in the working class. But the government's policies didn't guarantee their basic health rights. And so it caused the following results. Through the results, we can see that the inequalities between the Han people and the indigenous people. Next, Kenny is going to talk more about the ethnic identity issues.
Thank you, Vanessa. Before I start, I would like to ask everyone a question. Have you ever missed yourself in your ethnic identity? Such as, you are a person who lives in Chiayi City. You are a person who lives in Chiayi City, but you don't know what turkey rice is. It seems ridiculous, right? However, it often happens on the group of people. They are indigenous people. Most of the indigenous people don't know their mother tongue and culture due to the insufficient resources. These unfair distribution includes education, healthcare, economic, political, and other institutional resources. As a result of being dominated, it will lead most of them to choose to migrate or to protest for a better living quality. A research in Taiwan's indigenous people portal shows that more than 45% of Aboriginal youth are currently living in non-Aboriginal townships and cities. Some of them came with their parents, and some of them came for their studies. So after a long period of time, they will gradually forget their culture and mother tongue, since no one can pass them on. So after knowing the issues they face, how can we help? Now I'm going to talk about some actions governments and non-governmental organizations take to assure their rights. First, to assure their education rights, governments and non-governmental organizations has provided study place and books. Second, to preserve their mother tongue, governments has run tests. If you pass a test, you can have welfare or even an advantage in passing the college. And Lucy is going to talk about the economic issues.
Thank you, Candy. And now I'm going to talk about the economic issues. We all need money, don't we? But according to the research in 2018, the average of indigenous people's salary was about 10,000 less a month. Over 50% of them cannot get more than 30,000 a month, which is low. But not only the low salary, but also the high unemployment rate. In 2001, the unemployment rate of Taiwanese was about 5.3%, but that of the indigenous people was 15.9%, obviously higher. Even by the help with the government, the percentage becomes lower, but still, the indigenous people have the high unemployment rate. But why? Why does the data show that they have these kind of issues? There are some main reasons. The first one is low education. In 2018, 40.1% of the indigenous people graduated from high school. 17.8% of them graduated from junior high, and 17% of them even not graduated from elementary school. They lack of educational resources, but in our society, high education means high competitive drift. Poverty makes their educational level low, and low education makes them poor. It's like a circulation, and it hasn't been resolved. Because of the low education, most of the indigenous people work as labor forces. But in these years, more and more foreign workers from Southeastern Asia came to Taiwan, and they replaced the labor force of the indigenous people. So because of these workers, they might lose their job easily. The last reason is natural disasters. Typhoons, earthquakes, and floods often happen in Taiwan, and these might destroy where they live and their land. 20% of the indigenous people work farming as their job. They plant things such as beans, mushrooms, vegetables, or flowers. But if these kind of natural disasters happen, then they cannot make money from it. Also, the governors in their history took away their land. Losing land means losing their property and resources. Although we are in different boats, you in your boat and we in our canoe. We share the same river of life, which means we all live on the same island. Even though we may have different ways of living, we still share the same land. Nowadays, indigenous people's rights are coming to the public's attention, but still there are some rights that need to be considered. What we can do is respect each other and focus more on what situation they are facing to make Taiwan a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, group number 7. Next up is group number 8.
Hello everyone. Have you heard of the indigenous challenges? As you see on this picture, in 1991, which is in the left-hand side, there are almost half of the lands are indigenous people's land, which is red. But almost 30 years, the land has decreased critically. This shows that the challenges they are facing is precarious. So today, my teammates and I are going to talk about 3 challenges they are facing. First, the nuclear waste, which is a political controversy. Second, the traditional field lost. And last, the rural medical care. First, let's welcome Justin to talk about the nuclear waste.
Thank you, Kyle. Now I am going to talk about the first issue, which is about the Dawu people who live on Lanyu Island. As we can see, Taiwan has been developing nuclear power for over 30 years. Since of this, the government needs to find a place for them to build to put the nuclear power waste. After they cannot find a suitable place on Taiwan, they began to put their eye on Lanyu Island. But the nuclear power waste often can carry a lot of radiation, which can cause the pollution of land or even a cancer for the Dawu people. So, Dawu people began to launch many protests to pass on their demand. Besides this, the government still didn't really care about them. The nuclear power waste still transported to Lanyu, and the health of Dawu people still get worse and worse. In this case, the most important is not the land pollution or the health of Dawu people. The most important is the government occupation of the Lanyu people traditional field, which we will introduce in the next part of our presentation.
Thank you, Justin. Now, we are going to talk about the traditional field laws. During the Japanese period, Japanese government carried out the land policy. They occupied numerous Aboriginal land and cut a lot of trees. Not only the mountain and fields, but also the plant was destroyed. When the ROC government came to Taiwan, the problem was not solved either. They took over the Aboriginal land, enact a special law to control the land. Now, for the most classic example, Asia Cement Corporation is a Taiwanese native company engaged in the mineral industry. The picture of the Aboriginal land was reclaimed because Asia Cement Corporation wanted to mine more mineral resource. They need to strive for Aboriginal agreements. But mining the land where Aboriginal live is unsuitable. I think we should cooperate with government to protect our land. And we should take part in protest because Asia Cement Corporation occupy the island where we live. Or we should solve the problem from the roots. The law about mining activity is not suitable for the current situation. On the other hand, we also need to regulate the government to be harsher in investigating, to create a balance between environmental protection and land development to make a win-win. Now, next, Rachel will talk about the rural medical care.
Thank you, Willie. Finally, I'm going to talk about the rural medical care of Taiwanese indigenous people from two different aspects. Firstly, there is a tremendous gap between urban areas and rural areas regarding the number of medical facilities and nurses. For example, there are 7,682 doctors in Taipei City. Meanwhile, only 245 doctors are distributed to Taichung. When patients' conditions become severe, doctors in rural areas aren't able to handle them. Thus, they need to be transferred to hospitals in urban areas, which are far away from their home. Secondly, indigenous people lack medical knowledge. Their customs and beliefs often determine when medical care must be provided, and it is usually delayed. As a result, the rate of indigenous people suffering from chronic diseases has been increasing. For instance, the rate of chronic patients in Taichung is about 4 times that of Taipei. That is pretty tragic. This picture shows the lack of medical facilities in different regions of Taiwan. The redder the area, the more medical resources it needs. As you can see, eastern Taiwan, which is where most indigenous people live, is in desperate need of rural medical care. This picture shows how much rural medical care is being distributed to different areas in Taiwan. The more dots there are, the more rural medical care there are. So, what can we do to improve rural healthcare? First, we can expand the number of doctors and nurses. Next, improve access to care. Third, upgrade medical facilities. Next, boost critical care response. Then, promote remote care. Last but not least, strengthen medevac mechanism. For rural areas are harder to reach by other means of transportation.
Last, the Council of Indigenous People Minister has said, we, as well as the indigenous people, are equal. Challenges for indigenous people are challenges for all human beings. Hope we can pay more attention toward the challenges they are facing, help them and speak for them. Thank you.
Thank you, group number 8. Next up is group number 9, talking about urban indigenous people.
And the topic today, we're going to talk about urban indigenous people. Have you ever heard of urban indigenous people? You might think that, oh, for indigenous people who live in a tribe, but actually no. There are some indigenous people who live in a city and their lifestyle is just like ours. It's even really hard to tell what is the differences between Han people and indigenous people. So we're going to introduce this group of people and we'll divide our presentation into 3 parts: background, effects, and development plan. First, we're going to talk about the background. Why there are so many urban indigenous people? The main reason for the formation of indigenous people is related to the industrial transformation in 1960s. The economic force changed from agricultural economy to labor-intensive industry, and agricultural economy declined. So the companies in the city offer more employment opportunities, and a great deal of population has been concentrated in the city. And there are more factors that contributed to urbanism. For example, the indigenous reservations losses and the population growth and the intermarriage between Han people and indigenous people, and their lifestyle changed a lot. And now Irene is going to talk about the effect part.
Thank you, Ella. They grow up in the tribe, so they usually don't have a good education to study basic knowledge. So their average educational attainment is different from ours. When they decide to move to the urban areas, everything is different from the tribe and what they have done before. Because they can't adjust to the new environments, they can only do the low-skill work. And the work usually is very dangerous, tiring, and low salary. They are not able to compete with the job market, so moving to urban areas can help them have a better life, and also that the indigenous culture disappear faster. And next we're going to talk about the development plans nowadays. Because of the historical policies and the economic issues, the indigenous people cannot have the right to speak their own language and their culture in the past. So the government nowadays is going to save and spread the traditional culture and the language which is almost gone. We call this transformational justice. To fulfill this and make the urban indigenous people's life better, the government's organization, Urban Indigenous 原住民委员会 has made a series of plans. And next NC will discuss it from 4 perspectives, which include education, culture, economic, and social welfare.
Thank you, Irene. Then let's begin. First, to improve education, government should ensure indigenous children's education and care, such as promote their academic interests, improve their academic abilities, and provide them various academic channels. In addition, educate and strengthen the function of indigenous families. These welfare programs, through these programs, the urban indigenous children will get a better family education and a higher academic degree. Secondly, to make the standard of indigenous economy higher, government should provide more employment opportunities for them. Also encourage the development of indigenous distinctive industries, such as their special fabric industries and their special mills. Furthermore, provide loans, startup grants, fundraising services, and more. These programs will significantly boost the urban indigenous economy. And the next one is culture. To preserve and spread their culture, indigenous native language education, traditional culture education, and also their population identity needs to be promoted. And the government should also support indigenous organizations and their traditional culture transmissions, such as the Harvest Festival of the Ames and the Flying Fish Festival from the Dao. Through these programs, more and more people will learn about this unique culture, so that as the time passes, their culture won't lost or disappear. They will be remembered and inherited. Finally, to fulfill transformational justice, social welfare plays a vital role. To guarantee the basic right of the urban indigenous people, government should provide welfare such as legal services, emergency relief, and life support. Furthermore, provide public housing, residence assistance, and subsidies for the urban indigenous people. These welfare programs are expected to benefit more than 24,000 urban indigenous people in 5 years. And after the Taiwan governments adopt these programs, the urban indigenous people may lead a better life, and at the same time, they won't lose their culture. Then the next comes Ella. She's going to talk about the conclusions.
Thanks, Cecily. And now we know, even though their learning styles is really similar to ours, but they still have some differences. Maybe it's really hard for them to adjust to this society, but not like us. So what we need to do is to respect them and help them. And in order to have a better future, what we need to do is to respect each other, help each other, understand each other, and learn from each other. This is the end of our speech. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, group number 9. Next up is group number 10, talking about some issues that Indigenous people face.
Hello everyone, my name is Ken. Today, me and my teammates are going to present the issue faced by Taiwanese indigenous people. Have you ever heard of some indigenous people being paraded in the street? There are still several issues that concerning indigenous people in Taiwan today. In addition to ones that are visible on the news, there are still many hidden problems that need to be resolved. During our presentation, we hope to make everyone think about what they can do for these indigenous people. So today, our presentation is divided into 3 main sections. Ellen will start off by looking at hunting rights, which is a very controversial issue. Then Claire will move on to the problem that indigenous people are losing their language. That's also an issue worth discussing. Finally, Kenneth will address the issue of Aboriginals land rights. Next, let's welcome Alan.
In indigenous cultures, hunting is an important part of life. It helps indigenous boys become independent. Hunting is a way how indigenous boys socialize. All prayers during hunting are the gifts from the mountain god. Also, hunting is such a serious event. It has many taboos. As I mentioned, all the prayers during hunting are gifts from the mountain god. So you never know what quantity and species of animal you will meet during hunting. But not all animals you meet are huntable. You can hunt animals which can defend themselves or run away. Those include breastfeeding, mating, childbearing, and pregnant animals. At nighttime, you can hunt falcons or birds. But there are some problems between indigenous cultures and the law. Taiwan's laws ask indigenous hunters to declare how many and what kind of animal they will hunt, which violates their culture. Second, indigenous hunters can only use homemade guns to hunt. There are numerous people who died or heavily injured because of the unguaranteed quality of the homemade guns. Those problems were not noticed by the public until the well-known incident happened, Tama Talun's persecution. In Tama Talun's case, he hunted because his mother wanted to eat meat, and he ignored the rule because it was impossible for him to obtain a permission immediately. So he was sentenced. Tama Talun was acquitted after some people stood up for him. After acquitted, Tama Talun said, "It is strange that our government wants us to pass on our culture, but we are punished for it." Several years has passed since indigenous people losing their hunting rights, and I think now is the time to give it back to them. Hunting is not the main reason why the animals have gone extinct. It's because we cut down the trees, build out roads, and destroy the habitat. Therefore, there is no reason for us to take away the hunting rights, as hunting is an important part of their life. Next, let's welcome Claire.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, now I'm going to show you the language loss and issue about the indigenous. There are 16 tribes formally recognized by Taiwan's government, with about 508,000 population. Yet, the thing which is unbelievable is, why are there only 35% of Taiwan of indigenous can speak their native language fluently? Just imagine in Taiwan, there are only 35% of Taiwanese can speak Chinese well. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Taiwan's indigenous history was miserable and bitter. Under the authoritarian and the assimilationist rule of Japan, and then the nationalist KMT regime, native languages were criminalized. That means there will be fewer and fewer people speak these languages, because you wouldn't like to be arrested for speaking these languages, right? I think most of the value in preserving real languages is humility. Language is the most important element of a community's culture. On the language side, the specific knowledge of the community is lost, and a unique window into the world is closed. James Madison, an American linguist, has said, "Language is culture. When the language disappears, the ethnic group will also die." It is really heartbreaking. So, our government is seeking to address the oppression of the indigenous. In 2016, President Tsai Ing-wen apologized publicly for the centuries of pain and mistreatment. And in 2017, the Parliament passed a law to promote and preserve indigenous people's languages. Furthermore, they established a Language Research and Development Foundation, and then the offering of language courses of schools and colleges. And what can we do? Just be respectful of their cultures and language. Next, Kenneth will show you the land rights of indigenous people.
Thank you, Claire. The last topic we'll discuss is indigenous peoples' land rights. Indigenous people's traditional territory is an important part of their culture, and almost everything they do is relating to it. The photo shows the difference between traditional territory and the reservations. The traditional territory is in blue, and the reservations is in yellow. As you can see, the blue parts are much larger than the yellow parts. And this is one of the reasons why the land are being lost. Next, I will discuss the mining issue. The S1A Corporation has mined in mountains for over 40 years. Mining began in the 1970s and resulting in the conflict. The S1A Corporation was suspected of falsifying the land use right abandonment letter, so indigenous people began to protest. Indigenous people have trouble recovering their lands because of two overlord clauses. Article 31, indefinite extension of mineral rights, and Article 47, obtaining mineral rights does not require the consent of the landowner. Due to those, mining rights extension is almost impossible to reject.
The Ministry of Economic Affairs announced in February that the 2 overlord clauses would be deleted, and the whole affair was finally over. Next, Ken will give us the conclusion of our presentation.
Okay, thank you, Kenneth. After hearing our report, do you have a better understanding of the problem that indigenous people face today? Many people believe that the indigenous people already enjoy more benefit than the average people, but in fact, there are still several issues that have yet to be resolved for the Aboriginal people. At the end of the report, I want to share a picture with all the participants holding a sign. No one is an outsider. They think the land is their mother, just like a human mother. Just like a human mother. When the land is faced from them or destroyed, they will feel hurt because they belong to the land and they are part of it. As you can see from this picture, they are very courageous for refusing to submit to the government. So what should we do for them is a question worth pondering. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you, group number 10. Next up is group number 11, talking about some indigenous challenges.
Good morning. Most people have a question. What should we do when facing the problem of losing cultures? As indigenous people, we should protect and pass our own culture. Also, prompt the government to put more attention to indigenous culture conservation. As hand and feet group, when you try to give indigenous people a hand, would you think about whether they want to accept the help or not, or if the help is what they need? So let's move on to our topic, loss of culture and land. The presentation was divided into 3 parts. Our goal is to lead you to a deeper understanding of the causes of the loss of indigenous culture and land. Also provide some solutions to indigenous people and give them fair treatment. Indigenous people need to confront the dilemmas of losing their cultures and land. These raise questions of historical harm and bias. Next, my partner Bella and Stacey will introduce more.
Thank you, Pauline. Languages are the most important in history. People use their own words in records. There are 16 confirmed tribes of indigenous people in Taiwan. According to the UNESCO survey report, 16 indigenous languages in Taiwan, 5 of them are critically endangered. 1 is seriously endangered, and others are all in weak condition. Indigenous people who speak their languages often live in remote areas far from cities. Native languages of the Plains Aborigines are extinct. Numerous indigenous youths leave their tribe for better opportunities and life. As a result, their next generation becomes urban indigenous people, lacking knowledge of their ancestors. Some only went back to the tribe occasionally, some rarely never. Having a connection between languages and environment with the elders, they may lose their identity of being indigenous offspring. Indigenous people experience domination by Dutch, Spanish, Qing Dynasty, Japanese, and ROC. With continuous increase of population and economic development, people gradually developed from plains to mountains. The original lands of the Aborigines disappeared faster than people made it. Taiwanese indigenous people have a concept of traditional territory that not only includes the land they reside on, but also sacred grounds, hunting grounds, ritual grounds, and farming grounds. As you can see, there is a clear difference between their original territory and nowadays. Then, Stacy will introduce the historical harm indigenous people have suffered.
Thank you, Bella. Now I'll introduce some extent and conclusion. About 1912, the government of the Republic of China aimed to civilize the indigenous people. This meant trying to remove their language and culture. Many stories were told in Chinese textbooks to depict the savageness of indigenous people until 1989. This caused indigenous children to feel embraced by their identities. Just like this white bird, they feel different and helpless, not knowing they should be proud of themselves. In our histories, some elderly indigenous people say that the Japanese government divided their families, forced relocation, and even arranged tribes with bad relationships together. Therefore, it was difficult for tribes to live in harmony and unity, which also affect traditional rituals. Now, mainstream society and indigenous groups are becoming increasingly aware of the need to protect indigenous cultures. I will give some examples. The first one is Covenant Level Council of Indigenous People, also called CIP. It led to the birth of the government-funded Taiwan Indigenous Television Station in July 2005, the first one of its kind in Asia. The second one is Web Titan Google. It recently helped to establish the Endangered Language Project in light of the dire situation facing many languages worldwide. There is a saying in indigenous people: being humble to the land, respecting other lives, to coexist with other groups of people in pursuit of common good. These are values that we believe in. As the general public, we should imitate them to respect their land's culture, and we believe that the government should revise more legal provisions that can protect indigenous people without harming the public, or pass the draft of indigenous self-governance that has been delayed for many years as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, group number 11. Our last group is group number 12, discussing Aboriginal issues.
Hello everyone, my name is Mandy. Today our group is going to talk about some Taiwan Aboriginal issues. Do you know what kind of conditions do Aboriginal face? We will discuss 3 topics of issue for you. The first one is about a decrease in populations. Why is Taiwan Aboriginal populations keep falling? Second is about Uno choir, an Aboriginal music on the top stage in Taiwan. The third one is about cultural consumption of vegetables. Aboriginal holy festivals are treated as fun tourist events. Why did it happen? Next, welcome Vivian to talk about a decrease in population. Thank you, Mandy. The issue I'm talking about is the Aboriginals' decreasing population. First, lack of medicine care. Some Aboriginals live in rural areas, which are far away from hospitals in the city. Because of this, they might not be able to get to a hospital conveniently. Second, poverty. Some Aboriginals don't get much money for them to have children or go to a hospital. Third, the low birth rate. It means that people have fewer children. It affects many groups of people, including Aboriginals. Next, Phoebe will introduce the Women's Club.
Thank you, Lily. I'll begin with introducing First Nation Choir School, namely BNC School. Booker was the principal of Lona Elementary School. He founded this school in order to help talented Aboriginal students have better performance in both schoolwork and music. The students in BNC school come from different elementary schools in 11 Aboriginal villages in Sydney Township. According to Booker, over 80% of them are from lower income families. The purpose of the BNC school First is to help Aboriginal children build self-confidence, since they have fewer educational results than city peers. Booker considers music as the best way to achieve the goal. Secondly, he hopes that BNC school can give children the courage to dream and the ability to achieve the goal. In fact, those students become more helpful, responsible, and organized at home. Third, the purpose of BNC school is to pass on Aboriginal culture to the next generation. Booker arranged the songs for the chorus himself. Learning a song means becoming acquainted with the language, culture, and history of the Bunong people, he said. Although the fascinating choir of BNC school has achieved good results in music, Booker insists that priority for the choir members is learning, not singing. Next, come to Wendy.
Thank you, Phoebe. I'm going to take a look at cultural consumptions of vegetables. In our society, more and more Aboriginal festivals become tourist events in the eyes of others. The culture is treated as a commodity. First, I will focus on what exactly tourists do. As I just said, some tourists treat the Aboriginal culture as a commodity. When they visit Aboriginal festivals, they will ask, "Hey, turn around and pose for a photo," or "Hey, when will you guys dance for us?" It is very, very impolite and disrespectful. Tourists often fail to distinguish between performance and festivals. Their ceremony is not a performance for us. It is for their holy festivals. Second, I will be looking at why. Why are their holy festivals considered as tourist activities? Because the footsteps of the city step into the tribe to plunder resources. The Aboriginal people need to make a living outside the tribe. They will sell their special food or sing their tribe song to attract tourists. But to their surprise, tourists also invaded their festivals. For the solutions, I think we need to tell everyone that the Aboriginals' traditional dance and sing are not performed for tourists. Their performances are for the holy ceremonies. The Aboriginal people isn't opposed others come to their festivals, but they hope tourists could follow the announcements. We should respect all their culture. If you want to join the festivals, help to prepare with them. They will see you as their friends. Finally, Vivian will make a conclusion for us.
The quote, "Never too late for justice." In modern society, the Aboriginals face many challenges and difficulties. We should give them respect and empathy for them to get the justice that they deserve. This is the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you to group number 12. This concludes today's presentation. Please give a round of applause for all of the presenters today. Thank you for that. We're good?
Thank you very much for your hard work. I understand that it is a very long period of time. However, you are giving a presentation, of course, with the attention, but disappointingly, I saw a couple people playing video games on their cell phones. I saw